Hi, this is Jennifer Riggins of The New Stack, and today we're talking from KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America. Of course, not all in Boston, but from the comfort of our homes, because just like the European awesome version of KubeCon, we can join from anywhere, which is kind of a small bonus in 2020. And today we're talking to Andrew Stevenson, Chief Technical Officer and co-founder of Lenses.io, leading its technical strategy and engineering team. Today, we're talking about how Apache Kafka and Kubernetes can together dramatically increase the agility and efficiency of building real-time data applications. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So let's start by talking a little bit about your own tech journey, Andrew, and then tell us about Lenses.io.
Yeah, okay. Well, if I start my background, I actually started off as a civil engineer. That's what I first studied at university, and then I moved on to computer science. And what I've tried to always do is I've always tried to take that civil engineering background with me. I don't reinvent the wheel and keep focus on what the business problem you're trying to solve is. But when I did start my first computer job, really, I was actually a C++ programmer. That was 20 years ago. So no IDE, very much at the command line. So that was an interesting journey, but it was all again around real-time data. It was for a stock exchange based down in Luxembourg. From there, I actually moved on to data warehousing for a lot of high-frequency trading firms, where I saw the power of data in the hands of people who actually understand it and who can use it. And then I actually moved on towards doing big data contracting in a lot of the open source world. So I spent a lot of time in the investment banking scene in London, where I saw implementations of open source technology, some good, some bad. And I saw the struggles that organizations had around it, not only to use the technology, but to actually implement it and get it into production in a corporate environment, which is quite often the challenge.
And what is usually that challenge in implementing? Is there, when you hear data and everything you've done is basically around data, or construction before that, and constructing now systems around data, is it something we should be scared of? Is it a security red flag that we should be worried about all this data out there?
Well,
Right.
data is a constant and it's moving around no matter what technology we're using, right? You know, whether I was doing C++ to move data around or using the Microsoft stack in the data warehousing world, or moving on to the open source components. It's a constant, and it's a theme throughout what we're always going to be doing as software engineers. The problem comes when you actually have to take it into production and have to put guidelines and governance around it, and this is something that traditionally open source has been lacking. If we take Kafka, for example, it was developed at LinkedIn for a specific purpose, and it takes time for it to build the tooling around it and even to introduce things like SSL. That didn't come till later on when I was working with Kafka, and these things simply aren't acceptable when you're working in investment banking. Things like having passwords in the URLs. When you're trying to connect to a database, it's not acceptable, right? It's going to be printed out in the logs. So it's a real struggle of making sure that open source technology has the governance around it. It's not that data is something new to people in organizations. They have data, but it's the security aspect around it. And if you couple that with quite often the lack of visibility on open source technology, is where it starts to fail at an enterprise level. You cannot go to the head of a trading desk at Barclays Investment Bank and expect him to use the command line to do his work to be able to see the data. So this is where it often falls down: the lack of governance, the lack of security around it, and also I think what's missed is the people who understand the data getting the access to them. You often, if you go for Kafka or if you go for Kubernetes, they're expensive, they're complicated, right? You need to find people who can operate this technology. They're hard to find, they're expensive, and they don't know your domain model. I always say I was a technologist, right? I wasn't an expert in market risk. So I wasn't understanding the context of the data that I was working with. And I think that's sometimes often often lacking. You may build a data pipeline to find out it's fundamentally wrong because you can't join these types of data together. So if you can get the business experts in with the governance around it on top of this awesome open source technology, that's where I see you're really actually successful. And that's what we're doing at Lensa.io.
So when it comes down to it, it's as always about breaking down those silos between the business, the Venn diagram, and trying to hit that point where the business speaks to the data scientist, speaks to the governance CISO branch, that everyone understands where they are. Is that what you mean by the portmanteau DataOps? Why don't we start by explaining what DataOps even means? Because y'all like your blank ops.
Yeah. So DataOps is about taking the data management aspects that you have, all the policies, the governance, and the knowledge and the data stewardship, and coupling that with the operational aspect of it. So being able to create self-service flows, being able to actually scale your platforms. We have one client, Avanza, which is a Swiss bank, online bank. And so to be able to scale their platform and to be able to open up access to it for all the different use cases that they have, they need to apply not only the technical infrastructure that Lensa helps with. We have our own SQL engine and masking that can help with the GDPR, but they also have to apply the governance around that. Who can access the data? Who has access to the data, plus all the masking requirements that they need on top. So it's DataOps is a mix of management combined with the correct tooling and the visibility that you need to be able to create a self-service flow. If you build a data platform and you can't onboard tenants onto it and they can't make use of it, you'll actually just become a cost center. And in the current economic climate, you don't want to be a cost center. You want your platform to be successful. So you need the management, the governance, the auditing, the security, everything that we apply, plus the visibility, like a SQL engine. We have our own SQL engine across Kafka as well, to get those with the business knowledge onto the platform so they can build their real-time data pipelines.
To be fair, I don't know if any bank ever wants something to be a cost center, whether in a verge of recession or not. So I think it can work in any time frame. But also, it seems like that visibility helps with when we're talking about GDPR, which is the European Data Initiative, or if we're talking about the California data laws and things like that. You need that visibility because there's a very good chance you're getting fined if you can't prove you're properly protecting data. So it totally makes sense. Now, what is a real-time data platform? Why does it have to be real-time? Can't we just save our data? And then how does it help organizations digitally transform, or maybe what is holding them back from that transformation?
So effectively, what a real-time data platform is connecting all those different services. If we think about Kubernetes, all the microservices that we deployed, connecting them all together so we can drive some business product, a data product effectively, or data is a product out of it. So typically in this case, we would use Apache Kafka. There are other alternatives as well, but Kafka's most dominant at the moment. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to actually get the data faster. And the faster you get the data, the more valuable it is. Data decays over time. So by enabling a real-time service, you can react and you can build your use cases, and you can see and think about more use cases as well. So we have another client, Vizeka, which is a European payment system. And what they actually were able to do was able to connect, I think, over 15 different data sources together very, very quickly, all meeting the European GDPR regulations as well, to build new products. So now they're actually, for example, if you use their card on your birthday, then they'll send you an extra coupon. So it allows them to actually keep ahead of the competition, use the data that is product, use the data that's their domain knowledge to actually build their flows, right? So Kafka, Kubernetes, great technologies, but complicated. So we're there to help them take the pain and the complexity out of that.
I think the theme we're hearing, and we're going to continue to hear at this year's KubeCon, is all about simplifying Kubernetes and probably data and everything Kafka too, but let's be honest, everyone loves Kubernetes. No one likes how complicated it is, or some of the defaults are not secure by default, or we need to make everything easier so you can get, not everyone needs to see Kubernetes. Everyone needs to get the benefit from Kubernetes.
I totally agree with that. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he talks about on Azure about having tech intensity, and hats off to the whole community here for both on Kafka and Kubernetes. They've got this technology into a place now where I see it almost as a commodity to be consumed, right? So we can start building on top of Kubernetes, we can start building on top of Kafka, because I can go to all the clouds now and I can get the managed services from them, and I can then start focus on building the data intensity. So building that application landscape. If I get Kafka or Kubernetes, okay, until I actually use it and make it easy to use, then it's just burning dollars. And it's my data and it's my IP that I'm putting on top of it, and that's what we want to accelerate for every organization, not just the organizations that can afford the software engineers, and not only afford the software engineers but retain them as well. Everyone should be able to contribute in the data economy.
It's so important because it affects literally everyone. So if we work in data, it's our responsibility for the future.
Yeah, so we have another client called Babylon Health. So they're a UK startup, right? Well, they're a unicorn now, but yeah. So their goal is to provide affordable healthcare to everyone on the planet, right? They don't want to get consumed by, oh, we're using this programming language versus that program language versus this technology. They just want to use the commodity software that they have, Kubernetes, Kafka from all the different cloud providers, put it down in all the geographical locations so they can generate the real business value, right? And there's nothing more important than your health, especially at the moment. So that's, I think, I'm seeing the shift back to what is the business reason that we're doing this? What is the data behind it? How do we use that data? That's the valuable piece we're at.
And when we're talking about Babylon Health, I'm based here in London. It's not just the business reason, it's the human life reason, because
exactly, yeah,
the keys are closed or are phone only. So you can choose people, at least in London, the main provider of app healthcare, if that's a thing, MHealth, is Babylon. And it's this massive organization that's scaling so rapidly, and even in these trying times, you just see jobs everywhere in tech and the culture side of tech with Babylon. It's such an important role to feel secure about our data, our private healthcare data in this app.
Yeah, so you need everything to be secure. You need to have the governance in place in it, and that's where the DataOps side comes into it. Having the tooling around Kafka and on top of Kubernetes, that you can build these great apps, right? Building an app, it's such a noble cause when you think about it, rather than deciding which flavor of Kubernetes you want to be on. You're actually using that great technology to actually provide a real value to the whole of society.
It seems like KubeCon 2021 will be in name only, because hopefully we won't be talking about Kubernetes anymore, and we'll be talking about the benefits it's providing on top of it, because that's what tech is supposed to be. It's not features, about benefits. It's not about it's about what it accomplishes. So tell me more about how Lenses.io accomplishes that with Kafka and Kubernetes.
Yeah, so what we provide actually is a secure self-service portal on top of Kafka. So it's focused on the data layer. So where is your data? What's inside it? What does the schema look like as well? We also provide the processing capability. So we have our own SQL engine. So this is not only for viewing the data. If you want to debug, for example, we have Playtika, which is a gaming company, and they have about 600 developers all using lenses to debug their application flows as well. But we can also join, and we can also aggregate data, so you can build these real-time applications very, very easily with a SQLite syntax to allow the rapid development of data pipelines. And where Kubernetes comes in is we need a place to deploy these applications. I often speak to a lot of clients and they go, great, I've got Kafka. And we go, okay, right, where are you going to actually deploy all your applications and how are you going to scale and how are you going to manage them? So that's where the tie-in with Kubernetes comes. So we allow our users seamlessly just to, they type a bit of SQL statements to join, to aggregate data from one topic to another, and then we'll deploy it out into Kubernetes for them, and we'll monitor it and we'll manage it as well for them, and we're extending that out across more than just our SQL processes as well. So Kubernetes becomes a mechanism. That's where it's good at. It's really good at allowing us to say, okay, I want one instance of this effectively SQL processor, which is like, just think of it like a little microservice. And then now I want to scale it up because let's say the market's open, stock exchange is open, and there's a spike, and we want to scale out and then scale back down as well. And we just abstracted away from the user. As a business user, do I need to know if it's Kubernetes? Do I need to know if it's container instances? Not really. I just want my app running and I want it scaled up and down. So that's how we do the interaction.
I gotta say, it sounds like APIs 5-6 years ago, where I always used to say the first rule of APIs is never talk about the API because no one cares. Just like Kubernetes. Kubernetes has this long name and is overwhelming when the business side just wants to know the results and what they can do with it. So maybe they don't hear it. Granted, I'm at KubeCon right now and we love Kubernetes, but we need to also speak the business side, which also brings me to, it sounds like what you're describing, a lot of these data pipelines you're building are based around user stories, and they're going into the event-driven architecture and behavior-driven architecture and understanding, mapping the technology to the business use cases and the actual end user. Is that right? Or
yeah, it's about how fast can you share your data experience. So there's several different aspects to it. There's data discovery. So where is my data? Where is it flowing to? Who's consuming it? So these also help with GDPR, right? So we can see the applications that are consuming, let's say, credit card information, and we can mask that as well. We can also allow the people to actually visualize their streams as well. But we could be talking here about deploying our own little microservice to feed a real-time fraud detection app. It simply could be more traditional ETL work. We expose the full power of a real-time streaming engine with the scalability of Kubernetes via a simple user interface, and it's all config driven as well. So the use cases vary. We have Vortexa, which is tracking seaborne freight. So they're tracking the movement of ships moving around and trying to figure out where they're going to go. So they actually monitor the infrastructure of Kafka and their pipelines that are out there. We already mentioned Playtika, so they're allowing everyone to debug as well. And we also have risk fuel, right? So, their focus is on actually doing machine learning to analyze fuel movements as well. So they want to actually just concentrate on that with their data scientists rather than building streaming floors, and they build their streaming floors simply with our SQL engine. So there's a varied mix of use case from large multinationals down to startups, people tracking cows in Canada as well. So
which again, these are all real world problems and logistics and feeding people. Right now, we realized back in March that we weren't ready for everything. Yeah. And we need these fail safe. So data is real-time data is the most important thing we need in technology. Maybe not the most important, security and data privacy protection, of course, first, but it's the thing most in demand right now, because we just need transparency to be prepared for contingency plans and everything in reaction, right?
But you also need context around the data. Back to my example of working in the financial industry, I'm not the market risk expert. If we look at COVID now, what's the point of having all this awesome technology behind the scenes and getting data moving, millions of records a second through the system, if we're not giving the right people access? I'm not a doctor, so there's no point giving me access to all this medical data because I can't do anything with it. So we have to make sure we get the visibility in place with the controls to the right people, right? To the doctors, to the healthcare professionals, so they can get that data real time to actually help us out.
Which is why you have that masking feature in there, because that's the only way you could do it compliantly and
Yeah.
protect privacy, because the individual does not matter as much as the aggregate of the data, and making sure that that individual is still very protected.
Yeah, you need role-based security in there. You need the data governance aspect. So that's what we provide. We actually provide a multi-tenancy on top of Kafka and the other systems that we connect to, plus the lower level granularity of the masking. So basically, this is how advanced we're able to do it, because they come in via the Lenses APIs. It's the role-based security. They can do it via SQL. We then have the data policies, and we audit everything as well. So that gives them the confidence to scale out and to onboard people onto their platform as well, to get more use cases to drive their data product forward.
Completely. So why is it that open source is winning? What are the risks of enterprise, very regulated? You're usually mentioning highly regulated industries in your use cases. Why would they go open source?
Well, everyone wants to go open source now. In some cases, in my experience, I've seen it because they want to keep up with everyone else. So they want to take an open source technology that are often built for the scale that they need at a relatively cheap cost price. If you think about the financial industry, they were dealing with this volume of data long before they started adopting open source. But open source is cheaper. It does have a vibe around it of having innovation, and these are all true. But when you try and apply that, you have to be aware of the fact that it does take these highly skilled people to be able to operate Kubernetes, Kafka, or any of the more traditional big data stacks, if I can say that now. So that's complex. And again, then these people don't have the data context. I didn't have the data context. At Barclays, I had 50 engineers working for me, and none of them, they're all Scala developers and Kafka developers, and none of them knew the business, right? So it was, and when you don't have the security and the governance, it's a long road to get it into production. And I always say, if you don't make it into production, it doesn't count, right? Because that's where you're actually driving the value. So it's difficult. There's a lack often of documentation. If you take on open source, you'll have to build in a lot of workarounds, which is slowing you down from your core directive, right? You should be, Babylon's case, delivering healthcare to everyone on the planet, not fighting open source technology, not building your own UIs, not building your own multi-tenancy around Kafka. So that is the challenge with open source, and that's where we come in. We do have a lot of open source components out there. We have a lot of open source UIs as well for Kafka, schema registry, Kafka Connect, and we have a lot of connectors, right? Because you need to be able to connect all your systems together. But the big challenge with open source is making sure that you recognize the total cost of ownership. Can you find the people to run it? Can you maintain them, right? Can you keep their salary expectations? Can you keep them interested enough? Because there's a lot of people, I've done it as well, right? Resume or CV++ out there, so using the wrong technology so they can tick the box.
Yeah, Kubernetes. You don't have Kubernetes in your CV, you're not getting a job anywhere.
Yeah. Well, when I interview people, I try to see, well, did you use Kubernetes and did you get it to production? Did you was the project you use it for a success, I think is what the criteria we should be looking at. But open source is great, right? I'm not trying to knock open source. It's great. I love the technology. You just have to be aware of adopting it brings complexity, and that complexity has a cost. But we are reaching this point of tech intensity. I can go to AWS, Azure, Google now, and I can get Kubernetes and I can have it managed for me. That's great. I can do the same with Kafka. That's great. And now I want to just move on, use that tech intensity to build the data intensity, where I'm actually using my data, deploying my application, deploying my knowledge, right? And letting the community, I'm leveraging the community to provide that managed service for me.
No, absolutely. And when you talk about complexity has a cost, so does holding on to all that data all those years and not finding value from it. So that's what has to happen. You have to figure out how to chain all those events together, chain all the tooling together to finally get that value out of that data, and hopefully getting to market faster. Because if like you described, if the developers are building tools, but then it was getting stuck behind governance, if governance isn't baked in from the start, it's kind of too late. And by the time it gets released, you've been beaten by a competitor because they already released something better before.
Yeah, I've worked on a number of projects and spent a lot of money. I was one of these highly paid contractors as well, right? And it's expensive. And okay, I'm a little bit biased, but if I'd had lenses or something similar to lenses, I probably would have completed the projects on time or even earlier, rather than spending a lot of money, having a lot of frustration building up on the business side with their faith in open source technology, because all they see is then the problems with it. When it is great technology, we just have to apply it in the right places and make sure we get the ecosystem around it to support it properly.
I think honestly that's advice for anything. We have to apply it in the right places and have the ecosystem around it.
Yeah.
Not just open source, but all technology. That's the problem, those silos that are keeping different departments from understanding, like the business value, the development side understanding the business value, and then the business side getting insight to if the technology they're investing in actually has a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So this has been really interesting. And just what are some of the other challenges that developers are facing when they're building real-time apps with Kubernetes? How are they overcoming them? Speaking to the audience.
So what we generally see is the problem is actually that as data engineers move into a real-time data system, the paradigm shifts. It's a real-time stream of data. It never ends. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of challenge on the data engineering community to manage that shift from batch thinking. Where is my CSV file? Right? I hear quite a lot. There is no CSV file. It's a constant stream of events. So they have that challenge, plus then thinking about, oh no, I've got to figure out how Kubernetes works as well. So that's why we're trying to make it a lot simpler by just abstracting it away. And Kubernetes is great. I can scale up and scale down my applications and deploy them out. And yeah, we don't want to talk about APIs, but it is quite a standard API. So if we can, we can handle the management of that for them, of scaling their application, deploying their applications, they can get back to actually understanding what it means to move from a batch to a real-time world, and more importantly, understanding what their data is.
And understanding, I guess I want to hear more about them understanding or adapting to that space, because like you said, they're used to their spreadsheets and in batches, so they can see a time limit. They can see things in a certain window, but now as everything's streaming, it's continual. How are they getting those insights? How are they getting confidence in the tooling that everything is accurate?
It's difficult. It's a big paradigm shift for a lot of people, but how we do it is by giving them a familiar tool, right? So we give them SQL to be able to do that. And the SQL operates in as much as it can, because it's running on Apache Kafka, in the same way as it does on a relational database system. So there's a lot of familiarity there in the tooling, so they can get going quickly, so they can verify what they want to do. For example, you can do a snapshot query to say, give me the records between these certain timeframes, and we'll allow you to do that rather than having to understand the details of Kafka and opening the console to have to do that as well. Plus, we support the more advanced features as well. But it's that familiarity of something like SQL with the user interface that greatly helps people make this jump. There is a learning curve. I'm not going to say there isn't. It is different, but we're trying to make it as easy as possible. And in some cases, a lot of what they're trying to do is just move data from one place to the other. Now, we have a data catalog. We're building out our app catalog. So we're in a point where actually we can just, forget even about the app. We talk about what we want to do with the data. I don't want to have to stand up a Kafka Connect, a processor, another sink. I want to move data, and we'll stand up and we'll deploy into Kubernetes, because that's the great framework that we'll use, the correct application to do what the business user is wanting to do with his data. I want to move data. I want to join and aggregate it, right? We'll construct the necessary queries based off our data catalog, the knowledge. Also, we push out into different systems. That for me is key on where we're going with our roadmap. How can I discover data? How can I access it in a secure way? And then how can I make it actionable, right? I want to build a data catalog, great, but I want to actually use and create actionable insights based on that discovery. And that's where we're going with lenses. And that's what Kafka allows, and that's what Kubernetes allows, because where we're going to deploy these apps, right, we're going to deploy them inside of Kubernetes.
And I have to say, when you describe a learning curve, the data engineers I know kind of want that, because they don't want the locked box of information. They want to actually learn how the system works, or at least get a knowledge and understand, feel some sort of control in there, so that they can then, like you said, the discover, access, everything about that. They want that. They don't want to just have a blocked box. They want to understand where their data is going, so they can have trust in your systems.
Yeah, I mean, we do all that, so the SQL processes, it's just a little microservice, right? It reads from a topic, it writes to a topic, it may join, it may filter, it may aggregate, but it's still a little component in the chain. So you end up building a composable pipeline to move data around, and we give you the full visibility into it. And, we're quite open about the fact that it's Kafka underneath. And you do have to know a bit about Kafka to understand how the query engine works. So this is also a danger with things like SQL. You give somebody SQL, and they'll automatically expect it works like a relational database. And we try our best, but it's not. It's Kafka underneath, right? Or maybe it's Apache Pulsar underneath. So there are some fundamental differences. So it does mean that even though we give you SQL, as a data engineer, you still have to know about the underlying technology to figure out what's realistic and what you can and can't do as well.
Which in the end checks off Kafka on their CV or resume.
Yeah.
So there we go, back to that. Let's be honest. A lot of people are looking for jobs right now, and they will still be looking for new tools to have on their CV. So that's not a bad thing to have either. So in the end, like, just going full circle, how is the combination of Kafka, Kubernetes, and Microsoft services making data initiatives successful for organizations? What are the measurable parts of that?
Well, so Kafka is bringing the ability to handle the real-time volumes. It opens the use cases up because it's effectively a log. So it allows different use cases to build up state, so we can query and send that data off to the relevant data store that we need. So, but Kubernetes there, it's tying in because it's the place where we need to deploy those applications quickly, and it all comes down to time to market. effectively. That's the quantifier, and Kafka provides the ability to handle the volume, build the use cases, and Kubernetes then gives us the place to be able to deploy the applications quickly. Couple that with the governance, couple that from the DataOps side and the data management, and then you just get to production faster. You don't get stuck. In banks, you often get you'll hit the run the bank guys, the operations guys, and if they're not happy, you're not going anywhere, right? So the more governance you have, and the earlier you can engage them in the pipeline, the more chance you have of progressing forward.
Absolutely, and it's just nothing can in a bank go ahead without governance. So if governance is in from the start, time to market is going to always accelerate, and the bank's going to have less fines and be more successful. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there anything else I'm missing that you think the KubeCon audience that's listening today is really going to be excited in learning about in the DataOps space?
Well, I think if I talk about my roadmap, we briefly touched on it earlier, that we can now deploy our own SQL engine into Kubernetes. Lenses itself can be deployed inside of Kubernetes as well. But what we're going forward with is an app catalog. So effectively, any app that's reading and writing from Kafka that you can Dockerize, right? We'll actually deploy and manage it for you. So it's moving beyond, for us, beyond things like Helm. Helm's great, right? And Draft is also great. But what they're lacking for us is the tie-in to the data governance aspect, and the tie-in to, am I allowed to consume from this topic? Am I allowed to deploy an application against this topic? And stitching that all together to give it the complete application landscape. We have that actually in our product at the moment, the topology, but we're only going to enhance the integration we have with Kubernetes. With SQL, right, you can do a lot, but you can't do everything. Maybe I have a great Python app that I want to deploy, but you still want the governance around that as well. So we're actually building that into our product now. In fact, I think we're going to have a webinar next week about it as well, about how we've built that so we can basically deploy any Docker with a config and make sure we're wrapping the governance and the security and the auditing around it as well, so we can build these data products.
You just checked another point for data engineers, Python. So good job for that.
Yeah.
And now to go completely a different topic, but this is just the question I use to end each episode of New Stack Makers, even these live ones. What is one thing our listeners can do to help someone else get a leg up in the tech industry?
Okay, well, obviously working with the coolest technologies is always a good thing. So you can tick that on your CV as well. But one thing I've always learned, and I've been working now for nearly 30 years, and everybody who I really respect, who I've come across, doesn't matter if they're software engineers or in a different profession, they've always said, if you know your business, that's the key, right? If you understand your business, then you can choose the right technology, you can choose the right patterns to actually make that a success. And that will always, for me, stand out more than just purely a tick box against specific technology. Yes, technology is great, but technology coupled with an understanding of why you were doing it. So Babylon, I was using Kubernetes to build affordable healthcare for everyone on the planet. For me, that's always more interesting to see, and success. If you understand what you're trying to build, more than likely you're going to choose the right technology, the right approach, so you can get it into production. And ultimately, that gives you more recognition as well, and more faith back from the business to again go off and invest in your technology as well.
So definitely it comes down to breaking down silos. And even in your current job, if you're in a position where you can mentor someone, don't just look in your own department, but make sure you're mentoring people in other departments as well. So maybe making sure that the developer team, the data engineer team, does understand that business value and taking that onus on yourself to share.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Understanding why you are doing something is extremely valuable.
The Simon Sinek, the why. Everything is about visualizing the why.
Yeah.
And there's usually purpose. When there's data involved, there's people, and there's purpose involved.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This is Jennifer on the New Stack Makers, talking to Andrew Stevenson of Lenses.io. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of conference. Thank you so much.